Good afternoon, my name is Sean, and welcome to the Australian Conference of Economics, also known as ACE. I'll first begin with Task 1, Question 1. I'll first discuss about how the consumption of taxes have an impact on consumer and producer welfare using a supply and demand diagram. As shown in the diagram, when consumption tax is introduced, there will be an increase in price paid by consumers, which results in a decrease in demand, causing D1 to shift towards the left towards D2. This would then result in a deadweight loss, highlighted in grey as shown in the triangle CAB. The tax revenue of the government can be found using the formula P5 minus P4 times Q2. It can also be seen that there will be a decrease in both consumer and producer surplus, and this is due to the fact that the goods are not traded at optimal price. This means that the transaction before the tax was introduced was much more beneficial for both consumers and producers. To conclude, consumption taxes do indeed have a significant impact on consumer and producer welfare, as it leads to a reduction in both consumer and producer surplus and also creates a deadweight loss in the market. Moving on to question 2, I'll be explaining what the implementation of taxation of imports, also known as tariffs, looks like and explain the deadweight loss between diagram 1 and diagram 2. When a country does not impose tax on imports, it causes the supply curve to shift to the right from S1 to S2, which means that the domestic producers cannot produce goods at a lower cost as compared to foreign imported goods. It also means that foreign supplied goods can be sold at a lower price due to the fact that there are no import costs. There will then be an increase in domestic quantity supplied, as consumers too will benefit from lower pricing, which will then lead to an increase in both consumer and producer surplus. To understand the impact, we can calculate consumer surplus by taking P2 minus P1 times Q1 divided by 2. To find producer surplus, this can be found by taking P1 minus P3 times Q1 divided by 2. When tariffs are imposed, domestic consumers will be paying more, which will benefit domestic producers due to the increase in price. The impact it has on international trade is that there will be a decrease in imports as Q2 becomes Q3. The new consumer surplus can be calculated when tariffs are imposed by taking P2 minus PW times Q2 divided by 2. The new producer surplus can also be calculated by taking PW minus P3 times Q3 divided by 2. The government benefits from tariffs as there will be tax revenue collected, which can be found by taking PT minus PW times Q5 minus Q4. This, however, comes at a cost, as deadweight loss, which represents the loss of efficiency due to tariffs imposed, is produced. The deadweight loss in this diagram are triangles CDF and EGB. Thus, in the supply and demand graph with tariffs, the impact on domestic markets is clear as price rises, consumption decreases, and there are both gains and losses. Tariffs are able to provide revenue to the government, but it will also lead to economic inefficiencies represented by the deadweight loss. As for the deadweight loss in part 1, there is a deadweight loss as consumption tax reduces the quantity traded in the market below the most optimal price. As for question 3, I'll be explaining how consumption taxes generally impact the aggregate demand and aggregate supply, which is known as ADAS, which is shown here in figure 3. The aggregate demand curve, AD, shows the total quantity of goods and services demanded at different price level, while the short-run aggregate supply curve, SRAS, shows the total quantity of goods and services supplied in the short run. And the long-run aggregate supply curve, LRAS, shows the quantity of goods and services supplied in the long run. As taxes fall under government intervention, this will affect the aggregate demand instead of the SRAS or the short-run aggregate supply. AD is likely to be affected if it falls under any of the shown C plus I plus G plus X minus M, where C is personal consumption expenditures, I is investment, G is government purchases of goods and services, X is exports, and M is imports. Together, this is all gross domestic product, as known as GDP. In the graph, Y1 equals U minus taxes, which means Y1 equals disposable income. It is also likely that AD1 will shift to the left, AD2, reducing the aggregate demand. Initially, equilibrium is at point A, where output is at Y1 and price is at P1. After consumption, tax is imposed. It will lead to a decrease in disposable income, which will also lead to a fall in consumption spendings, as there is not much additional income for expenditure. As consumption falls, aggregate demand also falls, resulting in a shift of AD1 to the left, stopping at AD2. The equilibrium would then form from point A to point C, where output falls from Y1 to Y2 and price falls from P1 to P2. In the short run, the impact of the leftward shift in the aggregate demand is due to a consumption tax, which results in a decrease in both output and the price level. However, in the long run, the economy could adjust to the consumption tax by using various methods such as changes in consumer behavior, technological advancements, and adjustments of input prices. These long-run adjustments could result in a new equilibrium being formed with a lower output level but a more stable price level, which is represented by the intersection of LRAS curve. Looking at question 4, using the sticky wage theory, I'll be explaining why imposing a tax that improves people's health would be unlikely to lead to any potential benefit for the economy. Firstly, by imposing a tax that improves people's health, such as a fat tax, it will most likely lead to an increase in price of unhealthy products such as sugary drinks. This would lead to a decrease in consumption and spending of money on unhealthy products, causing the aggregate demand curve to shift to the left from AD1 to AD2. This reflects a decrease in overall demand of goods and service at any price level. Secondly, with products being priced higher, workers will tend to negotiate for higher wages to maintain their current standard of living. As workers' wages increase, firms' costs rise, leading to a decrease in revenue that the firm receives from selling their goods or service. The decrease in the price that the firm receives equates to a rise in costs. When the firm is faced with higher costs, the company may cut back on their production supply, which leads to a decrease in both the short-run aggregate supply curve, also known as SRAS, and the long-run aggregate supply curve, LRAS, shifting both SRAS1 and LRAS1 to the left towards SRAS2 and LRAS2 respectively. As for question 5, I'll be using directed acyclic graphs, also known as DAG, to briefly discuss how it is possible to use an empirical econometric model to assess the health and economic growth consequences of a fat tax. Firstly, I'll briefly talk about what a fat tax is. A fat tax is a tax that's imposed on food and drinks that are high in sugar and unhealthy fats to discourage their consumption. This idea is to promote healthier choice products to consumers and also to reduce food-related health issues such as diabetes, obesity, and heart diseases. Assessing the consequences of a fat tax is a complex issue as it affects not only the consumer behavior but also the economy and public health. By using the directed acyclic graph, it helps us visualize and represent cause and effect relationships so as to understand the factors influencing each other. To assess the fat tax, we use the DAG by identifying the tax itself, consumer choices, health outcomes, as well as economic growth. The arrow that can be seen in the DAG shows how each variable influences each other. We can also use the DAG to assess consequences. For example, fat tax, health outcomes, as well as economic indicators are all connected causally using the DAG. With a fat tax imposed, it will lead to a decrease in diabetes, obesity, as well as heart disease, which will potentially cause the healthcare expenditure to decrease. Fat tax also leads to overall public health, increasing the chances of employment rate. With the increase in employment rate, as well as the decreased healthcare expenditure, it leads to increased GDP growth and increased economic growth. I have now come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time.